Hi there guys, welcome back. We're going to take a look at now how we can add a few more finishing touches to our double exposure effect to just give it that more pronounced lens-like aberrative response. It feels a little bit more filmic. So I've got my edge matte that we created that's combining my edge onto here. We've got our lovely background image coming through of our memory, and we've got our saturation effect on. I'm just going to bring this master lightness up a bit. Just going to bring this saturation up a smudge, possibly like so. And we're getting that lovely color coming through. So let's see what we can do to this. Now, first off, I'm going to add an adjustment layer. It's going to go above everything else, like so. I'm going to call this look. And this is going to be my overall kind of look to the piece. And I'm going to simply use Lumetri because it's quite a quick way of getting there. And I'm going to use a one of these 2383 Kodak LUTs, which is kind of a technical LUT. And then I'm just going to add a bit more of that technical LUT just to punch values in a bit. I'm going to up the vibrance a smudge. I'm then going to add a faded film look to this. And that's bringing me close to where I'd like to be. There we go. It's looking nice. I also want to add a vignette to this whole piece. So I'm going to go layer new solid. I'm going to create a kind of dark kind of brown vignette. So I'm going to take some of the darker colors out of here. Put this below my look. And I'm going to simply double click on the ellipse tool to create an elliptical mask, dead center. I'm going to subtract it, and I'm going to press F for feather and feather this right up. Then I'm going to change that to color burn. And then I'm just going to take its opacity down just to give it that look there. We're getting something a bit more interesting. And I'm going to come back into my look and open up the curves control and just punch a little bit more into there. Maybe lift the whites a little bit more. There we go. So if we look at it before the look and afterwards, we're just giving it that extra additional bit of punch that it might need. And that's coming together quite nicely. Okay. So we've got all this coming through now. So let's try something different this time. Let's bring in fact, my edge matte might want to bring a bit more of my person here, and I wonder if I could just go back into the mask of my edge matte here and see what would happen if I just brought in a bit more of the head shape here, or whether that would look slightly strange, possibly. I don't want it to be too on the nose. There we go. Okay, we're getting there. What we're going to do now is add a bit of lens aberration. So I'm going to layer new adjustment layer. And this is going to sit right under my look. I'm going to call this blur. I'm going to go effect, blur and sharpen, camera lens blur. Let's put it on something quite high. Let's put the refraction fringe on something fairly high, possibly. I'm going to change this back to 8 bits per channel, possibly, like so. Didn't need that before. I'm going to repeat edge pixels. So it repeats the edge pixels here. And then we're going to put a little bit of gain in there. Possibly bring this gain. So it starts to lighten up ever so slightly certain areas of the piece where it goes out of focus. Now it all seems a bit strange at the moment, and that's because I want this to only go out of focus in the edges and not at the center. So I need to create a blur map, and it's asking for one here. Look, what layer can I use as a blur map? And I currently haven't got one, but it needs a map, a layer with grayscale pixels in it, just to kind of use that as a way of saying what should be blur and what shouldn't. So I'm just going to simply create a new solid. I'm going to make sure it's pure black. We'll call this blur map, like so. And in there, I'm going to generate a gradient ramp. It's going to be a radial one. We're going to make sure the radial starts around the center. There we go. And then the white one, I'm going to zoom right out, because white basically means more blur. Black means less blur. And weirdly, for a blur map to work, it needs to be pre-composed. So I'm just going to go layer, pre-compose, press OK, come back to my blur, and now use this layer that we've just created, blur map, as its map. Turn the eye off. We now have this blur effect where things at the edges are going out of focus. Things in the center are not, they're in, and it just gives it this slightly aberrative quality. I'm then going to go to my project, and you remember that grayscale grunge map? Well, we can bring that in, and we can multiply it so the bright pixels disappear but the dark pixels stay. And then we could just try and scale it up a bit. Maybe stretch it a smudge. Okay. And then I'm going to press T for transparency, and I'm just going to bring it down. So it's only just perceived. It just creates this moody, interesting quality to things. I'm not quite sure about the quality of that glare at the moment. I'm not a big fan. So let's come to my blur effect and maybe take that gain down a bit, or the threshold up. There we are. It just gives it a bit of variation. There wasn't any before. And then what we can do, we can add some text. Let's go T. I'm going to type in some text. I'm going to use capitals with caps lock on. I'm going to go the Curious Engine presents. And it's using this nice Arno Pro serify font here. Fantastic. And if I want this to be impacted by the blur, I can drag it below. Take caps lock off. You'll see, look, it starts to go massively out of focus because it's in that very subtle gradient we've got. So I'm going to have to tweak that. Let's create another text layer below it. And this one's going to say, oh, what should we call this? Caps lock again, double exposure. Let's give that a different font. Let's go ITC, conduit, nice font. Let's take it bigger. Just so it fits. Possibly let's try 38. Oh, like so. Nice. Caps lock is on. Let's just change that blur amount down. So let's come to our blur gradient. And let's change the settings a little bit. And because we made the original solid black, we can actually blend with original just to bring less bright pixels into the equation, which means more comes into focus. So it's becoming more and more in focus. Maybe the blur is just too high, so let's take that to 45. And there we go, we've got a subtler effect. Things are becoming sharper. Our center point is kind of here, so maybe we could play with that by getting our blur map, getting our black point and putting it somewhere over here, just to kind of play with that concept. And it just brings things in a little bit sharper. Let's try 500. That's just taking things out more so. Blur map. Focal distance, maybe we can play with that a little bit. Oh, that's taking things out. Stretch map to fit, no. Center map, looking good. And maybe, that blur is still just a bit too pronounced. So let's go back to our blur gradient. Maybe redo it. That seems a little bit sharper now. See, it's quite sensitive as an effect, but it does offer that added just punctuation mark of a camera. Okay, so there we go. We've got something coming together. Our blur map is functioning nicely. And we have our double exposure effect. Little camera move in there, quite poetic. If we play it back, oh, let's turn our proper slow motion back on. I forgot to turn that back on because I turned that off last time. That means we'll get our smoother frame interpolated slow motion. We could continue to play with different effects. You could even kind of make wiggle and vary the kind of scratches. You could mask them in a little bit so they only appear at the edges. And there's lots that we can do to change this and tweak this. Eventually we'll get something that looks the part. You can see we just get these nice changes, these more organic changes. And that's how you can create that double exposure effect. So hopefully that proves to be useful. It's something you can explore and experiment with. There's lots of different settings you can tweak just to refine and finesse this. The links to all the files that I've used will be alongside this video guide, and you can then play and explore in your own time. But hopefully that was useful. Hopefully that's something you can explore. It's fairly simple. It's a good way of practicing procedural pre-comp kind of methodologies. It's a good way of using green screen alpha channels for different use cases. It's also another good example of how you can create your own little backgrounds using a simple composite of royalty-free videos and backgrounds. It's also a good way of exploring things like sun effects and basic kind of map painting skills. There's lots of things you can explore via this to create this overall look that's high production value, but is very manipulable and malleable, and can offer some really good and rewarding production value for your low budget, no budget films or educational explorations. So hopefully that was useful. Take care, best wishes, and see you again soon.